Right, guys, I'm gonna do our final one on the Black Death. The first recap on Renaissance. I'll do the Great Plague just so we can have a look at the similarities and differences between the two. But please make a note of the kind of things they believed caused disease, how they prevented it, and how they treated it, because this is how we can use this question. Right, just a little bit of background on it. People believed it originated from China. Actually, not 100% correct. We think it came from the camps of the Mongols, and then crept its way to China, and it made its way over to Europe and the rest of the world in trading ships. But most importantly, nobody knew this. Nobody knew the true cause. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Right, so it arrives. Well, it's actually probably there a little bit earlier, but in terms of its high point, 1348. All you need to know is it's in the medieval period, Black Death, medieval period, Great Plague, Renaissance. Just make sure you've got them in your locker. It spread throughout. It just rapidly killed. This is how frightening and scary it was. If you caught it, you were just expected to die. You're written off. It is still around today, but we can treat it quite easily. 1 in 3. They estimate in terms of the amount of people who died. People suggest also that the Black Plague, made way for the Renaissance, because people had to innovate. They had to then fill the gap of the amount of those who had died. But that's a different historical question. You need to be focusing on how did they deal with this crisis. Bit year 7 recap. You don't necessarily need to know the symptoms. However, fevers, chest pains, the famous buboes, sneezing, coughing with blood, etc. Right, here's a little source from the 14th century just to show how destructive it was. The mass burials, it got to the point where they were just chucking them into a ditch. They, again, like I said, they just couldn't handle it. And here's a nice source as well of the villagers carrying the coffins of the plague victims. Again, it just highlights the despair, the struggle. Right. Again, this is just a very quick causes and treatment prevention thing. So just make a note. I'll go into them in more detail in a later slide. But if your cause was the punishment from God, your treatment or prevention will be whipping yourselves and praying. Some people believe the plague was caused by witches or strangers, so quarantine was enacted, or people were banned from entering a certain town. If it was bad smells, miasma, you would keep the streets clean, you would burn rubbish. In addition, similar to the same vein as miasma, these poisonous fumes from volcanoes, people would carry these sweet smelling herbs. Kind of a weird one was they'd let birds fly around in the house, and in the idea that their flapping wings would scare off the poisonous fumes as well. Ringing of the bells, burning in the streets. So just keep these in mind, especially quarantine, because that's a good one to use in comparison to prevention methods in the modern period. Okay, what are the causes? Yeah, imbalance of the 4 humours. So you'd cut open the buboes, you would bleed them, leech them. Would be a common treatment. Right, okay, a little bit more detail. So everyone just keep in mind they had no idea what was going on, and everyone just tried a lot of crazy different ideas. So the Jews got a lot of blame. That's a big one in this period. The Jews got a lot of blame. They'd been expelled from England in the 13th century, so it wasn't necessarily the case in England itself. But around Europe, the Jews were an easy scapegoat. But strangers, like we said in the previous slide, would be barred entry into towns. Religious belief. So the common idea was it was punishment from God, believing the idea that God controlled all these significant events. So it was part of their plan. Now, the go-to normally in terms of any great crisis is that, and it's God related, is you can't stop it or cure it. Only God can do that. So you just have to say sorry. You just have to ask and plead for forgiveness. But at the end of the day, it'll only stop when God wants it stopped. Right, other causes, the natural idea, as we said before, miasma, these impure air and poisonous fumes from earthquakes or volcanoes. The supernatural is astrology. So in 1345, this is a good one to note down, just because you can bring in some specific information here. The positioning of the planets, or the unusual position of the planets, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. People thought this was foreboding, that something bad was going to happen. Okay, how are things treated? Well, the natural was again linked to your four humours: purging, but people vomiting and losing more nutrients were becoming more unwell. But again, going back to the herbal remedies as well, and buboes. You likely would die when your buboes was lanced. Supernatural again, forgiveness, flagellants, that kind of stuff. Right, prevention's the natural. Escaping the plague was quite important. If there's an outbreak, get out of there. So there was this general idea that they kind of knew it was getting passed on a little bit. They knew to an extent that it was getting passed on from person to person. The carrying of these herbal remedies to chase away the miasma as well. Supernatural, again, pray, go on pilgrimage. Again, all these go-to kind of religious ideas of preventing illness. So these are some of the more quirky ones. The idea of doing joyful things like listening to cheerful music and avoiding anything sad was from an Italian physician. And government action. Now this one's a little bit more important that just be aware of, just because we can use this in any similarity to how did people in the medieval period prevent illness that is similar to today. And you can use, of course, the Black Death, where you would have to be quarantined for 40 days compared to COVID-19. So government action was quite important in this one. Also, the government were important in wanting so the government here, the idea that they stopped cleaning the streets as well, as they thought the foul smell of rotten rubbish would drive away the miasma causing the plague. So government are getting involved, but just keep in mind they didn't have the power to really enforce these laws. All right. And generally, just the understanding the Black Death is people didn't understand it. They didn't understand what was going on, what was causing it, and this lack of understanding led to desperation. Okay, so again, just make notes on the key aspects of this. I'll do Great Plague next, just so we can compare it directly.